Hey there, welcome back to Tennille Talks. So to begin this reading, we'll just talk quickly about a bank. Now, a bank is a financial institution that stores money and provides loans. It's essential to the economy because it helps people create and store their money. Now, inside of the bank is a vault. Inside of the bank's vault, you may find safe deposit boxes. Now, these safe deposit boxes are secure containers inside of the bank's vault that's used to store valuables. You can often rent these boxes. Some of the things people put inside their safe deposit box are like their important documents, family heirlooms, jewelry, things that you would deem irreplaceable, hard to find, or just your valuable possessions. There are security measures to protect these boxes. They are designed to be very resilient. So that means they can withstand natural disasters like fires, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes. There is a risk to having a safe deposit box because the contents of this box are not insured or protected by the FDIC, which means that there's always a low risk about the contents of your box being stolen or damaged. All right, now let's begin the reading. Families, just like banks, are institutions. Well, if the most valuable things inside of a bank are kept in safe deposit boxes, then the most valuable thing inside of a family's institution is going to be their children. So in this reading, I'm comparing children to a safe deposit box in a bank. Now, here's the thing. The richest part of you is your inner child, right? And so the most valuable things inside of a bank are going to be those safety deposit boxes. Now, what makes your inner child so rich? It's going to be those childhood experiences, those emotions, sense of abundance, joy, freedom. Children naturally have that carefree attitude towards life. And it's like they always carry this willingness to embrace their playfulness, their creativity. They show us that there is a limitless potential, okay? And children kind of have this emotional wealth that's just never ending. So your inner child is essentially your safe deposit box. And so all of the valuables that your inner child is carrying, as you grow older, the contents of your inner child are what you use to grow and build and sustain your own institution, right? So every safe deposit box is essentially a child. And as children grow, the contents of what's inside of their box is what they use to find their own success, to thrive, and then to create their own family. That's what creates their own institution. Now, as a child grows and has a family of their own, all of their family members they're like a bank, right? They're like a bank. All of their family members are able to have open accounts at the bank until they close them, right? Because we're connected to family until we determine that we're not. Now let's talk about this reading. So in this reading, we begin with the energy of like a king or a queen of wands. This is somebody who's strong, lovable, likable, right? Trustworthy, responsible. This is kind of like a warrior energy. They would always choose love over fear, naturally understanding, and they just are unconditionally loving. Well, there was somebody in a king or a queen of wands type of energy who was sitting on top of their divinity without even knowing it. So when I say your divinity, I mean you are a divine being. But what happens if you don't always understand or recognize the values inside of your safe deposit box, your inner child, to determine whether or not your contents are really looking like something divine? And so as a child, if you are a part of a family or an institution, and if you are not taught about the contents or the values of your safe deposit box, then as you grow older, you may not understand the purpose. You may not understand your abilities. You may not understand why you're here and the worth of you. You may not understand that, right? So you've got this divine Queen of Wands who's growing up in their adulthood, But something is wrong emotionally with this Queen of Wands. Well, it's because when we're talking about emotions, we're talking about the energies inside of us that need to be expressed. We need to let them flow. We need to release them. Emotions are not anything that you hold on, but they're almost like messages that reveal something to us. And if you collect them, and if you don't read the message, honor the message, take note of the message, then that entire system can start to back up and kind of cause you health troubles. So emotionally, this Queen of Wands was going through some challenges, essentially. And the reason why this Queen of Wands was fighting emotionally, the battle was within, is because, when the emotion comes, sometimes we don't want to feel it. So sometimes we are tempted to fight the emotion. Sometimes we want to control the emotion. Sometimes we want to force the emotion to become something other than what it really is. And so you've got this divine Queen of Wands who is battling internally, emotionally, because she hasn't quite learned how to surrender to the current within. That current is that divinity, the flow. And so a lot of times before we step into our own divinity, before we understand the contents of our safe deposit boxes, meaning as an adult, when it's time to understand your value, when it's time to have a family of your own, when it's time to grow your own relationships, your worth and your understanding of self, that preferably should have been established in your family institution as a little child. Right? And so let's say when you have a healthy childhood, you are allowed to play with the contents of your safety deposit box. You can imagine, right? You can role play. But what I'm saying is that if you came from a family where your childhood was safe and protected, you could look inside and discover your worth. Your family was always going to tell you the most valuable parts of you and why you were just you and special to them. But in a family that wasn't necessarily healthy, those kids almost are never able to open their safety deposit box. They're never able to really experience the joy or the abundance or the freedom or the carefree attitudes, right? Now, there are some families where literally there's no time to be a child. Like the responsibilities are too great, or the traumas that the generations have endured are just too severe. And so childhood almost seems like a burden to the adults that have to care for these children. So can you imagine being a safety deposit box in a family that doesn't find children as value, that doesn't see that their most valuable possession is their child? And so how do you grow up as that type of child? What does your inner child look like, right? When it's time for you to open your box so that you can build your own institution, are you going to be comfortable? Are you going to believe that there's something inside of it? Or, so that's kind of where I'm going with this thing. So there's this Queen of Wands who's divine, right? But because there's been this emotional battle, and this emotional battle started in the Queen of Wands childhood, right? But there's this emotional battle, so it's almost like you're not able to access your divinity unless you can surrender emotionally. And so until we surrender and allow our emotions to just be what they are, without the temptation to control them, there could be a nightmare within. That nightmare means that we're battling ourselves. It looks like suffering. It may look like darkness. It may look like persecution. But a lot of times the adult battles that we are facing, it's because when we were those safe deposit boxes in those families, in those institutions, they didn't tell us why we were protected. They didn't tell us about all the things that were stored inside of us that we could use to grow a good life. So now when you're an adult and you're trying to make things work, and it's almost like you're blocked off from yourself. It's like you can't access yourself because you never had an opportunity to open up or to look in, or nobody ever poured into you and told you about the things that you possessed. And so in this adulthood, this Queen of Wands at some point wants to have some type of achievement, wants to experience victory, wants to work hard. But more importantly than work hard, the Queen of Wands wants to know that all of my efforts is going to bring me good news. But if there is an emotional block, if this Queen of or King of Wands can't access their divinity, then it's almost like They can't really open their safe deposit box. And how do you grow a life without the richest part of you? How do you grow a quality life if you can't access your inner child? Okay? And so the blockage inside of the Queen of Wands, at some point, it's like somebody recognized that something is hidden. Something is not being revealed to me. There's a mask, right? I'm holding back, but why am I holding back? Why can't I just jump all in? Why can't I reach me? Why can't I access me? Why can't I see me? Right? And so your inner child, your safety deposit box, the only way it knows what it knows about itself to be true is based on the relationships. Whoever else was in that institution when that child was still a safety deposit box is responsible for whether or not that child feels confident in who and what they are. And so at some point, we all are going to have to go back to our origin. And when I'm talking about our origin, I mean that we got to go back to our youth. And we have to try to connect with the contents, with the things that we were carrying. Now, not all families let children be children. Not all families respect or appreciate children. And so sometimes it is quite possible to have an entire childhood experience and never really understand your value. Never understood why you had worth to the family that you were assigned to. And so this is what causes the blocks with abundance, right? Can you imagine a divine being that is walking in divinity but can't access their divine guidance? Your divine guidance reminds you that you are abundance. You have to be abundance. You don't necessarily have to chase abundance. And the origin of that truth, the origin of that starts in your own creativity. That's your child. Your inner child is the seed to your divine guidance. The divine guidance says, listen, you are everything that you need to be. You have everything that you ever needed to have. But if you grew up in a very distorted or weak family institution, the relationships around you are never going to reveal to you that you are the abundance and that you won't have to chase it. And so a lot of times our inner child, our childhood experiences, it determines why we're trying to run and establish the institution we're trying to establish in our adulthood. It sets us up because everything inside of the safe deposit box is what you're supposed to use to grow your institution. What doesn't have to be a family, but it's you. This is your own banking system. Everybody gets to become a bank. You go from your safety deposit box. Everything that's valuable is what you use to build your wealth. It's what you use to build your foundation. And so in our adulthood, a lot of times when we recognize that there's an emotional blockage, when we're having trouble surrendering to our emotions, one of the reasons why is because of those relationships that we dealt with when our inner child was still very vulnerable, right? When our inner child was still very vulnerable, we had a lot of people around us that just weren't really pouring into us. They weren't telling us that we were divine. They weren't telling us that our creativity and our vitality was the magic. That was our wealth, right? And so sometimes you got to go back to go forward in order to release old patterns, or in order to recognize the needs that you had that were unmet. Sometimes you as an adult got to go back to your childhood so that you can identify what was needed. But you have to look at the bonds, the relationships, and the mirrors that were around you in your childhood, because they were mirroring things back to you about what was inside of your safety deposit box. But not everything that was mirrored back to you was you. Sometimes what people show you in your childhood is really their reflection. We call that just a projection. And so there's a divine being, a divine Queen of Wands who can't access the divine flow, can't access her abundance. Your abundance is your divine guidance. Wherever the divine guides you to go with inside of yourself is leading you to the richest part of who you are. So going back means, listen, I got to look at the memories. I got to look at the people from my past. I need to go recapture my past. I need to go back and create a whole new experience around my safety deposit box, right? In order to go back, just to go forward, you got to be your own guardian. You can't be afraid to take up space, and you can't be afraid to stand your ground. This is where you become an adult, but you also become the parent, the protector, and the greatest provider that you possibly have never had. And by doing this, you get to recover the contents of your safety deposit box. Now, the difficulties of trying to run a successful institution of your own without understanding your own worth and your own value, that is difficult. But the difficulties exist intentionally. Why? Because when you experience difficulties in your adulthood, what does it do? It transforms you, it expands you so that you can receive those gifts from the universe. Children have no problem receiving their divine or their universal gifts. But if you didn't understand that you were able to receive wealth, if you didn't understand that you were abundance and you didn't have to chase it, then how do you transform and expand your life? How do you have a life that the universe is financing? How do you have a life that the universe is funding, right? The idea is for us to exist easily, just as children did, where we give and receive playfully, creatively. And we do it again and again and again, right? To bypass the difficulties of giving and receiving, it requires a heightened level of awareness. But let's imagine that the relationships that you were surrounded by in your childhood were pretty toxic. You weren't protected. And so maybe as a little kid, you needed to invite help. Maybe you needed help, but you couldn't offer yourself help as a child, which is why it is so important in your adulthood is to go back and attempt to correct the things that you just really had no control over. When we're talking about inviting help, this reading is saying, listen, the reason why this king or queen of wands couldn't access their divinity, the reason why they were afraid, or the reason why they didn't have the tools to navigate their emotions or to not attempt to control their emotions is because they dealt with some type of bullying in their family institution. So imagine being a safe deposit box that's got some really unique, authentic, and divine gifts inside of them. But because of the family that you were seated in, they don't let you look inside. They actually bully you for the things that you potentially could have inside your safe deposit box. Y'all know those families or those people. It's like you're too this, you're too sensitive, you're too emotional, you're too kind, you're too nice, right? All of those divine qualities that you should grow with, grow into, and then use to benefit and finance your life, we become embarrassed about them, right? Because if your family didn't see the children as the vault or the most valuable things, maybe you were just embarrassed to exist as you were. Maybe people gossiped about you. Maybe people were unwilling to just let you exist as you were. As an adult, when you are going back to the past to establish boundaries with the people that you couldn't protect yourself from, one of the reasons why you're going back is because you're inviting the help that you couldn't invite as a little child. What does that mean? It's like that moment when you say, God, pursue me. I mean, God, really, finally, pursue me. And so the reason why it's hard for us to connect to our divinity or the Most High in our adulthood is because we were cut off from that part as children. And how are you cut off? Because you're bullied by the same people that care and protect you. It's almost like, the family members, your maternal, your paternal, those people are just placeholders for what the universe is really your mother, your father, the universe will become what your family set up in your adulthood. But you can't really entertain and engage with the laws of the universe for your own success if there are blockages, right? If you haven't recovered from what you endured. And so bullying, what does bully do to a safe deposit box? What does bully do to a child? To be bullied It means at some point you don't want to open up what's inside. You don't want to look inside. Why? Because you were ashamed that you were who you were. You looked how you looked. You behaved how you behaved. You spoke the way you spoke. You did the things you did. Sometimes when you get older, the last thing you want to do is go back and open up and to try to figure out if anything inside of you is valuable. If you were raised in an institution that bullied you, you're never going to recognize that you are carrying around priceless things that are hard to find, because not everybody is divine. Not everybody is carrying around divine gifts. And so the quality of your institution really determines the quality of your start as you transition from the safety deposit box that was once inside of your family into the institution that is building its own family or its own life. When you become your own bank, when you become your own financial institution, all of your family members, if you allow them, can still have open accounts. Okay? They can still access, which means they can still access you because energetically you're family, you're connected to each other. But what happens when you go back to your past and you recognize that these people were bullies? What happens if you go to the past and you're like, oh my God, the reason why my adulthood is so challenging is because I was surrounded by you fools, because this is what you did to me, right? It is absolutely possible to be a whole banking institution, but after going back to your past and recognize that those relationships were actually hiding your divinity from you. The very God that was pursuing you is the God that was hidden from you. Why? Because those people didn't like what was inside they didn't like the contents of your safety deposit box. Now, there is the banking institutions, they don't know what's inside your box, but they do have the ability to freeze access so that you can't even get into it if it's yours. What if some of your families froze or didn't allow you to access your gifts, your joy, your pleasure? Imagine that certain families actually freeze you out of it. They freeze you out of it. They don't know what's inside. They don't know what God put in it, but they just know that you got something that they don't have. And so the only way that they can keep you out of it is to bully you, to make you afraid to look inside, to make you ashamed, to make you guilty, to make you regretful, right? And so imagine that all of us at some point when we are trying to become our own institution, when we are trying to thrive, when we want to experience vitality in our adulthood, many of us will have to go back and look inside of that box that we never had a chance to, or that we were too embarrassed. Some of us may not even recognize that we all are still carrying around a safety deposit box. Listen, when you become your own bank, the most valuable part of you is still your inner child. You're just a whole institution now. But there is a vault inside of you. And inside of that vault is where your divinity is tucked. That's where you'll find your divine guidance. That's where you'll find your help. That's where the suffering ends. That's where the enlightenment is found. And so this is a reading about a king or a queen of wands who for quite a while was dealing with an internal battle, but it was emotional. And it was emotional because of the childhood that they experienced. The childhood that they experienced caused them to live in what felt like darkness, suffering, and persecution. And the reason why it felt like darkness is because their divinity was cut off from them. They couldn't access their divinity. Why? Because they kept trying to control their emotions and not just allow them to be. The divine communicates with you, sends messages through your emotional body. And so when you attempt to stop or force or control, when you can't allow things to flow, when you get an emotion and you cannot respond with peace and calmness, we have the ability to miss our message. Imagine decades and decades of missing your divine messages, of not being able to exist in your own divinity or your divine flow. Imagine not being guided, but the divine wanting to guide you, but you have been frozen out. You can't access your own box unless you go back to your childhood and you assess those relationships that hid your divinity from you. Y'all, so the way this reading progresses is it definitely talks about the present struggle in adulthood. But it talks about the adulthood struggles are really because things were hidden from us in our childhood. And the things that are hidden are the very things you need to thrive, right? And so the only way to uncover what's hidden is to return. But when you return to those experiences, you also are returning to put up a protection that you could not put up before. And so it is quite possible to be an adult, but to still decide, you know what, I am going to put up a boundary between this connection because this was the connection that caused me this torment. This was the connection that led to my suffering, led to my internal persecution, right? And so anybody that didn't value or allow you to access the contents or your most valuable possessions, those are going to be the people that you got to stand your ground with. Those are the people that are going to need to see how you guard yourself as an adult against them because you couldn't do it as a child. And here's the thing. This is how the reading is ending. It says that when you go back in order to go forward, when you start to secure your home, when you start to secure your boundaries, when you find an economic stability, and when you start to find the happiness in your life, don't be surprised if that same institution that wanted to hide from you your own value starts to become jealous or envious. Why? Because then they start to recognize that they have feelings of inadequacy. The whole reason that they froze you out of your safety deposit box, denied you access, or ridiculed you for what was in it is because something inside of them was always missing. They were carrying around a whole bunch of unmet needs. You think they were going to let you open up your box and figure out how to meet every one of your needs, and they didn't even do that in their own life? And so that is how the reading is ending. When the divine beings go back to claim their abundance, when they go back to the beginning to rewrite that story or to reset their nervous system, to reset their mind, their emotional body, when you go back to do a big reset, you are essentially claiming your spiritual or your divine gifts. You're claiming them in your adulthood, and then you got to work them. You got to master them. But in order to work and master them, you got to put up a boundary. Which means anybody that abused or bullied or didn't support or made you embarrassed about being who you are, they're not going to be able to rock with you when you start opening up your safety deposit box and making things happen for you, right? And so I see here liberation when you finally become free from the dullness of your life, when you become free from the disappointment, when you become free from the isolation. When you become free from all those old fears, all those old doubts, people are going to know that your life is looking different. You're moving different. Abundance seems to be finding you now, right? That is the part of us. We really just want to recover the fun. The inner child, that richest part of you, it is the ability to have fun and to just love this existence. That's the energy. That's that divine energy that you are going back to capture and to recover. But you got to trust the process and you got to enjoy the ride. And you got to remember that whatever I am seeking inside of this safety deposit box, that is me, is also seeking me. What you're seeking is seeking you. And so this is about carrying around the energy of excitement for things to come. You know how little kids, there was a field trip or a holiday or a birthday and you just couldn't go to sleep? It is that's that potential that we are going back to recover, because that is the divine energy that you need to kickstart the success of your own institution. All right, y'all, I love you so much. I did want to talk about something because this really is a reading about liberation, how you have to free yourself, and you got to free yourself by going backwards and finding all the things that you were created with that could bring you that abundance and that joy, right? And that freedom and the carefree attitude and the vitality. You're going back to get the energy. your pure, raw, divine energy. That's what we go back for. I wanted to mention something. In Hinduism, and I'm not very familiar, but I just learned a little bit of ancient spirituality that may help some of us, right? So in Hinduism, there are 4 main paths by which a follower can reach liberation. So wherever we are in liberating ourselves, maybe one of these paths can better help you understand which path you're at, what you're doing next, or maybe how much further you still have to go. So the first path is going to be the path of devotion. This means that normally when we are seeking God, we seek God for 4 reasons. We're in trouble, we desperately want something, we seek to understand God's nature, or we simply just love God without anything in return, right? And so when you are first starting to liberate yourself, your relationship with God is going to change and grow. At first, you'll just want something. You'll be like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. Please, God. Oh my God, I need this. Please, God, help me, right? Or I wonder what God's like. And then finally you're like, I don't care what God's like. I just love God and I don't need nothing, right? I'm fine. I'm just going to love God because I love God and I'm not really expecting anything in return, right? And so your relationship with the divine, it matters in how you liberate yourself. The second path is the path of knowledge. Now, this is the path that you must use to control your flesh, to control your senses. When you can control your flesh, you can withdraw your mind out of your immortal self and finally reach enlightenment. So that is when you control your flesh, those lusts, the greed, those low-level earthly desires must be controlled in order to learn, in order to be enlightened. Sometimes our flesh is so loud, we can't hear what our spirit needs because it's calling for food, sex, drugs. It wants so many things. And so controlling the flesh is first, not necessarily first, but it's important in order to receive the proper enlightenment, because your body's always going to be telling you you need something that maybe your soul or your spirit is not asking for. And so we're looking for enlightenment when we control our flesh. Then there's that path of selfless service. That's when you do what you have to do because it's the right service, not because you want a reward out of it, right? So this is really operating in integrity. Like, I'm going to be this way. I'm going to do these things whether people are looking or not, because I understand the value in existing this way. And then finally, there's the path of meditation. This is self-discipline. Meditation is about controlling the mind. Once you can control your mind, then you can connect with your true essence. And so essentially, in our adulthood, in order to liberate ourselves from the experiences that blocked us outside of our own value or our own possessions, right? Your relationship with God matters. Your relationship with your physical body matters. The relationship with your actions and your behavior matters. And then lastly, it is the relationship with your mind, because the universe is mental. All right, guys, I love you so much, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.